Good morning and welcome to All People's Church, Unitarian Universalist. My name is Tina Harmuth, and I'm happy to be your co-celebrant. Today we're very pleased to welcome Kendra Weddle back to All People's Church. Kendra is currently serving as the Scholar in Residence at North Haven Church in Dallas, Texas. Prior to this position, she was Professor of Religious Studies for over 10 years at Texas Wesleyan University. And before that, she was an Associate Professor of Religious Studies at George Fox University in Newberg, Oregon. She is especially interested in the intersections of faith and feminism and in working for justice as faith in action. Kendra lives in Irving with her husband, Brian, and their chocolate Labrador Retriever, Rue. Kendra, welcome to All People's Church.
Thank you.
So before we continue on to worship, here's an announcement. Saturday from October 22nd from 1 to 2:30 p.m., we will have the church council meeting. All committee chairs are requested to attend or send a representative. Members who are interested in finding out what the church is doing are encouraged to attend.
This house is for the ingathering of nature and human nature.
It is a house of freedom. It is a house of friendship, a haven in trouble, an open room for the encouragement of our struggle.
It is a house of freedom, guarding the dignity and worth of every person.
It offers a platform for the free voice, for declaring, both in times of security and danger, the full and undivided conflict of opinion.
It is a house of truth-seeking, where scientists can encourage devotion to their question, where mystics can abide in a community of searchers.
It is a house of art, adorning its celebrations with melodies and handiworks.
It is a house of prophecy, outrunning times past and times present in visions of growth and progress.
This house is a cradle for our dreams, the workshop of our common endeavor.
I invite you to stand for our chalice lighting, opening hymn, and spoken affirmation.
Flame of fire, spark of the universe that warmed our ancestral hearth, agent of life and death, symbol of truth and freedom, we strive to understand ourselves and our earthly home. Please join in singing our opening hymn, number 142. It is number 142. It is incorrect in the order of service. Let there be light. And now please join me in our spoken affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. Please be seated. Kendra invites the young and the young at heart to come forward for our time for all ages.
Good morning. Good morning. Hi. Here's a pillow for you, right behind you. It's great to see you all this morning. I brought something, and I thought you might help me kind of remember. Do you remember a couple years ago when the pandemic was just starting? Right? Exactly. Do you remember going to the store and looking for toilet paper? And it was non-existent. It wasn't there, right? And it lasted for quite a while, didn't it? You may have gone to the store multiple times and never found the toilet paper you were looking for. Well, I was kind of thinking about that because this is like a really ordinary thing that most of the time we never thought about. It was just always there. But I'm kind of grateful that it's there. Right? And maybe when we couldn't find it a couple years ago, that reminded us to be grateful even for toilet paper. I wonder what things you might be grateful for. Are there things that come to your mind today that you think, I'm kind of grateful for that? What's that? Life. There. Right, absolutely. Right? Life itself, so precious. Yeah, your teachers and your friends. Anything else you all can think of? There you go. You got my heart. Food. Yeah.
Colors.
Oh, right. Right, that's so true. Colors. Yes. Yeah. Well, I just want to encourage us to remember each day to be thankful and grateful for something, even if it's colors, and if it's our friends and our family and for life itself. Just take a moment every day and remember to be thankful. And maybe you'll think about that the next time. I know. And maybe you'll think about that the next time you use some toilet paper. Thanks for coming up today.
We'll sing the children out.
With number 414 as we leave this friendly place. We give to remind ourselves how many gifts we have to offer. We give to remember that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. We give because we believe in music and sacred space. We give with the faith that together we have enough. Our Share the Plate recipient is RACES, which stands for Refugee and Immigrant Center for Education and Legal Services. The offering will now be given and received in grateful appreciation of our shared hopes and values. Will the ushers please come forward?
We have two readings this morning. The first is from Pema Chodron. Now, she's an American Buddhist, and she was born in New York City. She graduated from the University of California in Berkeley and taught as an elementary school teacher for many years. She's interested in helping establish the monastic tradition in the West, as well as continuing her work with Buddhists of all traditions. The second reading that I have for us is by Mary Oliver, and the well-known poet probably needs no introduction. So here is from Pema Chodron. Only in an open, non-judgmental space can we acknowledge what we are feeling. Only in an open space where we're not all caught up in our own version of reality can we see and hear and feel with others and feel with others who they really are, which allows us to be with them and to communicate with them properly. And now hear the poem Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about your despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination and calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. Please join in singing our hymn now, number 168, One More Step.
We honor our time together with the shared stories and news from the congregation. Every week, there is a journal outside the entrance to the sanctuary where you can write a message of memory or hope. Also, at any time during our service, you are welcome to come forward and light a candle in our meditation center here at the side of the chancel. We focus our thoughts today on the many people in the world who face floods, drought, fires, and war. We turn our thoughts as well to those seeking refuge in another country, to those who are burdened by sickness, hunger, and pain, by sorrow and anxiety, violence and loss. We pause this morning to share our concern for these people and also for those closer to home about whom we are concerned. I have a message here. My name is Rita Vinson. To get a jump on Thanksgiving, I want to say how thankful I am to be celebrating my 80th birthday on October 12th and to be making new friends at All People's Church. I thank Reverend Annie for conducting the memorial service for my husband Phil in June and a joint service in January for his brother and sister-in-law. I'm available to attend church now on most Sundays and am inspired to do so by Misha's superb performance as a pianist and by the excellent work of Michael directing the choir and by the dedication of lay church leaders and support staff. And another message, thank you to everyone who donated to the soup drive. We raised $226 worth of soup and food for Eastside services. May the warmth of this community extend to all who are rejoicing or hurting in our wider world. The stories that live in this community are cherished even when unshared, as we keep one another in mind during the week ahead.
Of meditation. Let us open our minds and hearts to the place of quiet, to the silent prayer for the healing of pain and the soft, gentle coming of love. Amen. Simranjeet Singh, the author of the book The Light We Give, was born and raised in San Antonio. He's also a professor of religion and a person of faith from the Sikh tradition. You may have heard that mispronounced as Sikh, but it's actually Sikh. So when I use that this morning, you'll know it's the Sikh tradition. He tells about a time when he was living in New York City, and there was an elderly woman, and as she began to cross a busy street, she fell. Now, seeing her, Simran reached out his hand to help her. Now, you may know that as a Sikh, he was wearing a turban, something he has been doing since he was 3 years old. The woman initially held out her hand to receive the help, but when she saw his head covering, she withdrew her hand. And she blurted out, "Go back where you came from." Simran, who had in previous years been doing the hard spiritual work of transformation, and responding to racism and xenophobia, knew that she saw him as a danger. But she was a human being, someone who was desiring security. And so instead of responding with anger and hurt, Simran quickly turned to the other onlookers and asked for their help in getting her out of the street and out of danger. And he stayed on until it was clear that she was indeed safe. Reflecting on that experience, Simran writes, "I chose to care for this stranger even though she clearly didn't care for me. In a moment when it would have been easier to feel hurt and to walk away, I decided to double down on her humanity and my own." I tell this story to illustrate two contrasting pictures. The first is a description of where we are in society today. And the second is an illustration modeled by a sikh, a devotee, who gives us an example of who we can be. Now, David Brooks, a New York Times columnist, was recently in Dallas at SMU for the Tate Lecture Series. And he was participating in a conversation between David Gergen and Tom Friedman and himself. And he provided the following statistics about where we are. When asked if they know someone in their life who knows them well, 54% say no one knows me well. The number of people who say they have no close friends has quadrupled in a generation. Depression and teen suicide are both up by 58%. 26% say they have experienced a broken family relationship. Among high school and college-age students, 45% feel despondent. These indicators, Brooks notes, suggest that Americans are feeling sadness, the result of broken relationships. And these broken relationships and the sadness they foster within us are resulting in people lashing out in madness, in anger. And we see this, of course, every day. This is the bad news. But I don't think this is the full picture. There can be good news when we are willing to do the work of transformation. In Buddhism, we learn that we must do that hard work, that no one else can do it for us. In Buddhism, there's a set of virtues called the Four Immeasurables. When a Buddhist takes their vow, they dedicate their entire life to cultivating these virtues. And here's kind of a summary of those four things. Loving kindness, which means wishing well toward other beings. Compassion, which is recognizing the suffering of others and wishing for them to be free of suffering. Empathetic joy, which means rejoicing in the joy of others, even if it's not your own. And equanimity, which means even-mindedness and serenity. It's treating everyone impartially. Now, Buddhists and lay people alike work to cultivate these virtues. And they sound really lovely, right? But here's the thing. Whenever we train in these virtues, Buddhists also learn about far enemies and near enemies. The far enemies are really straightforward, like ill will is a far enemy of loving kindness. Cruelty is a far enemy of compassion. Jealousy is a far enemy of empathetic joy. And paranoia is a far enemy of equanimity. But the near enemies, not the far ones, but the near enemies are things that look so close to what we're trying to cultivate that they're actually fundamentally different in a dangerous way. For example, the near enemy of loving kindness is conditional love, selfish, sentimental attachment. When you wish well for others only when it makes you happy. It's like when you say you love ice cream. You're not really wishing ice cream well. You're wishing that ice cream to feel well in your mouth and as it goes down your throat. This widely known spiritual teacher, Jack Kornfield, says this about our near enemies. On the surface, the near enemy might look and even feel like connection or the real thing. But they are actually what drive us to disconnection. So important to kind of learn the differences. So learning the near enemies that masquerade as spiritual strength can help us know and understand ourselves better. And the reason this is important is because it's only when we know ourselves that we can truly make meaningful connection with others. So, in our time today, I'd like to talk about two aspects of meaningful interaction with others and give attention to this near enemy that masquerades in our lives. Okay, so the two I want to look at. Fitting in versus belonging is the first one. Fitting in versus belonging. I remember a time when I was probably early in high school, like maybe first year in high school. I lived on a farm, and we had planted a shelter belt. And for those of you who may not know, a shelter belt is kind of planting a series of trees around a perimeter in order to provide a windbreak. And in western Kansas, where I grew up, we needed a windbreak about more than anything else. So we had planted this shelter belt. Well, that meant that we needed to water those trees to get them established. And I remember there was a time, and it was the last evening before school started. And instead of getting to just do whatever it was we wanted, our parents made my sisters and I go out and water that shelter belt. And we were not very happy about it. Now, while we were out there watering, I heard something. Couldn't really see it, but I heard something. So I started to look, and sure enough, there was a rattlesnake. Now, if any of you know anything about western Kansas, you know there are rattlesnakes out there. And so, my sisters and I, we threw down a hat, because if you throw something and get their attention, then often they'll just stay right there. So we were able to take care of the snake. We threw a hat down, then we went and got some help and someone with a hoe and took care of the snake. And I say that, I want to share that story with you because in learning to recognize a rattlesnake was fairly easy once you kind of knew. You paid attention to what you were doing. You watched carefully. You saw where you were walking. You listened. You had to be alert. So I want to shift gears then and kind of mention, you all know the story of Adam and Eve in the garden and the serpent, right? So I want to take us to that Eve story with the serpent. But I want to do it without falling into the trap of just blaming Eve, right? Exactly. She gets way too much blame as it is. So I'm not interested in that so much as just thinking about the conversation that she has with the serpent. And if we just kind of pay attention to that conversation, there is something I think helpful that takes place there, or that we can learn about. When Eve decides to follow what the serpent suggests, and let me just say, she has very good reason to do it. If you study the text, she's actually the smart one. Nevertheless, in paying attention to the serpent, she is letting something else, determine the course of her life. And I want to suggest that that's fitting in rather than belonging. fitting in is the near enemy of belonging, because when we convince ourselves that we are among our people, that we are being valued, that we are being seen, and we are being heard, but it's only because we have changed ourselves, that's fitting in. That is not truly belonging. When we fit in, we fail to be true to who we truly are, and we form ourselves to the mold created by others. Brene Brown, who's a research professor at the University of Houston, she says that true belonging is the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. And it's an important distinction. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one I want to suggest is control versus connection. So control being the near enemy of connection. So I want to tell you this story that comes from the Buddhist tradition. There's this person, Shaun, and he was a teacher of Soto Zen. And when he was still a student, his father passed away, leaving him to care for his old mother. And whenever Shaun went to meditation hall after that, he always took his mother with him. Now, she could not be left alone, so she accompanied him on his journeys. And when he visited the monasteries, he couldn't live with the monks. So he would build a little house and he would care for her there. And he would copy sutras, which are Buddhist verses, and in this matter receive a few coins for food. When Shaun bought fish for his mother, the people scoffed at him, for the monk is not supposed to eat fish. But Shaun didn't mind. It was his mother, however. She was hurt to see others laughing at her son. So finally she told Shaun, "I think I'll become a nun." So she did, and the two began to study together. Now, Shaun was fond of music, and he was a master of the harp, which his mother also played, and on full moon nights, they used to play together. One night, a young lady passed by their house and heard the music. And she went to the house, and she was deeply touched, and so Shaun invited her in the next evening to come and hear them play. A few days later, they met the young lady on the street, and she thanked them for their hospitality. Others laughed at him then as well because she was a woman of the streets. One day, Shaun left for a distant temple to deliver a lecture. And a few months afterwards, he returned home. And when he did, he found that his mother was dead. Because his friends had not known where to reach him, the funeral service was already in progress. And so Shaun entered, and he walked up to the coffin, and he hit it with the staff. "Mother, your son has returned," he said. And he said, "I'm glad to see you have returned, son," he answered for his mother. "Yes, I'm glad too," Shaun responded. And then he announced to the people, "The funeral ceremony is over, you may bury the body." When Shaun was old, he knew his end was approaching, and he asked his disciples to gather around him in the morning, telling them that he was going to pass on around noon. In this Buddhist story, I think, let me just back up for a second. So he was going to pass on around noon, and so he asked his disciples to gather, and he wrote this poem and shared it with them. "For 56 years, I lived the best I could, making my way in this world. Now the rain has ended, clouds are clearing, the blue sky has a full moon. This Buddhist story serves a point, I think, that legalism is often fostered by religious systems when we fail to understand the goal of any religion that endures, which is to cultivate compassionate living. In his disregard for Buddhist practices that reflected simply the cultural milieu, Shaun demonstrated the higher practice of connection, as opposed to letting religious rules dictate his actions. Now, Brené Brown, again, that researcher from the University of Houston, defines connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. Disconnection, which is the far enemy of connection, leads to social isolation, loneliness, feelings of powerlessness. And I don't want to discount that. But just as important, however, is to grapple with our tendency to substitute control for connection. Do we cultivate a relationship because of our desire to have someone else act in a particular way toward us? Are we disappointed when the other person doesn't invest the time and energy in our relationships in ways that we desire? Is my desired outcome centered on me or on the shared relationship? I think these are questions that can help us identify whether we are cultivating connection or control. So we've looked at two different things, belonging and fitting in, or control or connection. So what can we do about these things? What kind of practical things can we do? And I just want to point out that this Sikh religious scholar in his book has very many practical ideas, and so here he shares with us 3. The first thing we can do is examine our motivations and try to identify when our near enemies are really masquerading as true spiritual growth. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that using a journal has been helpful for me. But there are lots of different ways that we can do this, and walking a labyrinth that you have is another excellent way of examining our motivations. Intention, of course, is the key. A second thing we can do is cultivate what the Sikhs call Shardi Kala. Now, Shardi Kala means everlasting optimism or rising spirits. And in his memoir, Simran writes about a time that I think is helpful here to give us an idea of this rising spirits. There was a mass shooting in Wisconsin at a Sikh temple in 2012. You may remember this. And a white supremacist fatally shot 6 people and wounded 4 others. Simran interviewed many of the people from that Sikh community, and what he heard from them really struck a chord. He said that all of them, of course, had any right to be outraged or demoralized by what happened, but instead, every one of them mentioned this teaching of Shardi Kala. Each day, the Sikhs pray for the uplifting of all humanity, and they speak of this Shardi Kala in the same breath. To recognize the other with everlasting optimism is to be connected. It's to see that we are on this journey together. Now, I think two things, two ideas can help in cultivating Shardi-Kala. One is finding a daily time every day to be grateful, what we were talking about earlier. Cultivating gratefulness as a response to living each day. And a second thing we can do is to practice radical connection. To make meaningful contact with one person each day. And I don't mean for this to be superficial connection like, oh, look, we're wearing the same shoes. Right? Or, oh yeah, I picked up some bananas too. But finding a way to make meaningful connection. Simran, again, writes about an experience he had on an airplane that illustrates this. He was seated in his aisle, and of course he's wearing his turban, and someone else was coming onto the plane, and sure enough, her seat was next to him. And as soon as she recognized that, there was kind of the and kind of threw some things in the overhead bin, and Simran had put his coat nicely up there, and so he assumed it had gotten messed up. And as soon as that person sat down, they pulled out the phone and started watching a newscast by a far-right organization. And he could have just turned away. But instead, Simran used that experience to try to make meaningful connection. And so had a conversation with this person, and turned out that they were returning home after being away for some cancer treatment. And so there was an opportunity there that he had to grasp in order to do this radical connection. So I suggest that that is another possibility for us. So again, we can examine our motivations. Why are we doing what we're doing? And are we inadvertently cultivating near enemies? And we can cultivate Shardi-Kala by being grateful every day and by seeking to have a radical connection with someone else every day. There's a Sikh scripture that speaks to the rationale for this radical connection, and I can't think of a better way to conclude what I want to share with you. So I want to just leave you with just this one sentence thought that comes from the Sikh tradition. Are you ready? Oh, my heart, mind, you are an embodiment of divine light. Recognize your origin. Amen. I think I need to... we have our closing hymn now, and it's number 110. Called Come, Children of Tomorrow, and if you will, let's please stand. Before
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Because of those who came before, we are. In spite of their failings, we believe. Because of and in spite of the horizons of their vision, we too dream. Let us go, remembering to praise, to live in the moment, and to bow to mystery.
The service has ended. At this time, all are welcome to join us for coffee, conversation, and refreshments in the library to the rear of the sanctuary.